For more on this, I'm joined by David Henig, Director of the UK Trade Policy Project. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I just want to begin with the fact it's been a really busy day. So world leaders have been descending on Davos. We just heard there from the European Commission President on Europe choosing free trade over tariffs. Is the EU able to negotiate with President Donald Trump on tariff threats without facing massive blowback?
Well, that is the question that EU leaders are wrestling with really constantly since Saturday, when this latest threat came in, is how much to push back on President Trump's threat of tariffs, how much to seek their own pathway of new trade agreements, and how much to just kind of accept what the US is trying to do or push back in private. Tomorrow is a key day because there will be meetings with President Trump in Davos, so we will see what comes out of that. But at this stage, there isn't the appetite across the EU for very strong retaliatory measures, maybe for some, but the EU is very anxious to avoid a trade war. So at this stage, I'm thinking that they are going to give some time for negotiations and discussions to bear fruit before they reach for those such measures.
And I'm sure they're very anxious about meeting Donald Trump tomorrow and hearing his speech in Davos. But David, we also heard from Scott Bessent, and he's urging European nations to sit back and relax over Trump's Greenland tariff threats. What do you make of this advice from the US Treasury Secretary? And basically, how is it going down with the Europeans?
Well, I think the US Treasury Secretary is speaking as much to US markets as he is to EU leaders, because he doesn't want to see markets spooked by the potential of a trade war. There's also a message in here, I think, that European leaders are well aware of, that Trump's threats don't always become actual actions. If we recall, it's a couple of weeks ago now that Trump threatened 25% tariffs on anybody doing business with Iran, and those have not yet come to pass. So that's another reason why time is being taken over this. EU leaders are, let's say, not particularly looking forward, I think, to meeting with Trump, but they are doing their best to see if they can find a resolution that doesn't involve giving Trump what he wants, so that they can basically diffuse this whole issue.
And it's really interesting you spoke about the US markets, because they did open lower today, obviously closed yesterday for Martin Luther King Day, but definitely rattled by this threat over Greenland. But amidst the ongoing geopolitical shocks, can Europe unite over Trump's comments on the bloc? Just today, the US president blasted the UK over the Chagos Islands, published text messages from the French President Emmanuel Macron and the NATO Secretary General. Let's be honest, Trump has gone for Europe since he came back into office, and sometimes Europe appear extremely divided.
I think at a basic level, Europe is actually quite united, and there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes between the offices of the leaders to try to keep that unity. We've seen it over Ukraine. We are seeing it over Trump. But that only goes so far. It only goes as far as getting the basic response, which is to say we are not giving up on Greenland. We do not believe it is for sale. In terms of taking retaliatory actions, there is not unity. There's talk sometimes of the EU deploying what's called as bazooka, the anti-coercion instrument. There is not sufficient unity for that to happen. In some ways, that may actually work out for the best, because it does take the EU in particular some time to decide what it's going to do. And President Trump may just get a little bit bored waiting and actually not end up doing what he threatened to do. So, yeah, Europe does struggle with unity, but on this particular case, with regard to Greenland, there is very little opposition to standing up against Trump.
Yeah, but opposition on how to retaliate. And I think that's one of the things that people are watching and looking at right now, David. But we've been talking about the threats that Donald Trump has made over Greenland, this 10% tariff. And you said, look, the EU are sitting back. They're hoping Trump might forget about it. But do you think Donald Trump is actually up for diplomacy at the moment? Because he's reiterated wanting to take Greenland one way or another since he started this this conversation just a few weeks ago.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think President Trump is ever really up for diplomacy. I think that's an activity that the Europeans and others try to do, and to reach different people in Washington who may be able to influence. I think this will ultimately come down, as much with Trump does, to the domestic argument. There are midterm elections coming up. He's not going to want to cause any more price increases in the US. There's a lot of concern in US political circles about what Trump is up to, and what I think Europe will be hoping for is that enough of that persuades the president to pause, at least for a while, and then he may forget about it, lose interest, think about other things that he is focused on, and that way the Greenland issue slightly goes away. This for Europe is very much about playing for time, particularly as they really don't want to get into a trade war, which will cost the EU economically and mean that EU consumers will face higher prices, which they don't want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the problems. It has to tread carefully because of how it could affect their economies in Europe. That's a good point. But what do you make of Donald Trump publishing Emmanuel Macron's text messages to him and the NATO secretary's text messages? And we've seen lots of AI-generated images of Trump arriving on Greenland with an American flag. Is this just not adding more fuel to the fire?
Well, I think by this point, everybody is used to President Trump, and I think that people know that their messages may get leaked. I don't think there's anything in what Macron said to Trump that is actually particularly surprising or offensive. And it actually does show the president of France pushing back against Trump's plans with regard to Greenland and trying to organise around it. So I think they're just trying to deal with Trump going into full. I mean, this is Trump going into almost the king mode that a lot of people in the US accuse him of wanting to be, and Europe is just trying to deal with it as best they can, as other countries have dealt with before. And this comes round potentially to all countries. So nobody is really fully exempt from Trump. At the moment, it's European countries, but it could be someone else tomorrow. This is the way that Trump operates. It is all about the show. It's all about him seeing whether he can achieve things. If he doesn't, he does sometimes move on. And it's for those reasons we think, okay, it's not yet a crisis. It could become one.
And I just want to ask you one other question just about Ursula von der Leyen's speech, because I thought it was quite interesting. She was speaking in Davos, and she also said that basically the EU is on the cusp of a historic free trade agreement with India. And I found that really interesting because it does show the EU has trading options. What more do we know about this? Because I do know von der Leyen is due in India.
Ursula von der Leyen is due to be in India next week it's a public holiday. She will be a guest of honour of the Indian Prime Minister Modi. They are hoping to sign a trade agreement there and then. It's not the most ambitious of trade agreements, but it does potentially reduce tariffs on in India for European goods and vice versa in Europe, and it potentially diversifies European trade, and that's absolutely what the EU is looking for. One of the main ways the EU is trying to respond to Trump is diversifying away from the US and dependence there, while also being cautious of China. A deal with India coming on top of a deal with South America, that would show that the EU was serious about diversification.
Brilliant to have you on the show and all your analysis. David, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. For more on this, I'm now joined by Saul Montes-Bradley, Vice President of Communications at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Saul, as usual, brilliant to have you on the show. I just want to talk to you a little bit about Davos, because we were talking about it earlier, and obviously all the big leaders are in Davos. But it's quite interesting. Gavin Newsom, of course, the Democratic governor of California, had a message for the Europeans, and he said, stop being pathetic and have a backbone on Greenland. Is he right? Is it time for Europe to stand tall against President Donald Trump?
Good afternoon, Leigh-Ann. Pleasure to be here again. It's funny that you lead with Gavin Newsom, the lame duck governor of California, pushed himself into a lot of trouble with corruption tied to billions that have disappeared from assistance to the homeless, and a state that is run up a debt that brings it to the brink of bankruptcy. He's desperately trying to get some attention, and this is one way of doing it. This is the same people that not too long ago were going after General Flynn for violating the Logan Act debt law from the 1700s.
So, Saul,
And
I just
now
want to
he's
go
doing
back.
it. It's not his job to conduct foreign policy.
Okay, so you say Gavin Newsom is a lame duck and basically the Europeans shouldn't listen to him. Okay, let's move on.
Yes.
Okay, no problem at all. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron has said the endless accumulation of new tariffs from the US is fundamentally unacceptable. So we're also hearing a similar tone coming from Emmanuel Macron. And I think a lot of people right now, Seoul and Europe, are asking, and conversations in Davos is, why is the US president going after his allies who have supported the US for so many years? Russia must just be sitting back watching this with popcorn.
Maybe they are, but those allies have supported the U.S. with humongous tariffs on U.S. products and subsidies on European products, and have been waging an economic war in the U.S. for decades. Mm-hmm. From aircraft to cars to cheese, Europe has been consistently anything but a free trader. Mm-hmm. Even now, we hear that we're going to have a free trade agreement with India, which means a reduction of import duties, not their elimination. Maybe they have to reset their minds and understand that free trade means free trade. And you cannot tariff the heck out of American products and then cry uncle when you get a 10%.
And so Donald Trump has been busy today. He's been posting a lot of things on Truth Social. We've had screenshots of messages with Emmanuel Macron and NATO's chief Mark Rutte, as well as these AI-generated images of himself placing an American flag on Greenland. What's Donald Trump up to? Is he not just making things worse the more and more he goes on Truth Social?
Well, actually, he has made them a lot better. A year and a half ago, nobody was talking about Greenland, while China and Russia were making their own move in the Arctic. And right now, we have Rutte ready to defend Greenland. We have the Prime Minister of Denmark speaking that NATO needs to take a bigger role in Greenland. Already the ground has shifted for the better. This is not going to end up with a US invasion. This is going to end up with Europe assuming the responsibilities, keeping the Arctic safe.
So do you think that what Donald Trump is doing is absolutely correct, and he's basically negotiating and he's trying to wake up Europe, he's trying to wake up NATO and said, this is an important place, you need to protect it and you haven't been doing enough?
Absolutely. And I think that to the degree that Europe is waking up to the importance of Greenland, he has already succeeded. Mm.
And President Donald Trump, of course, he arrives in Davos tomorrow, and I'm sure many leaders are anxiously awaiting his arrival, especially the European ones that have been speaking today. What can we expect from the US president when he is in Davos tomorrow?
I believe we should expect a more articulate definition of the problem and a more clear explanation of what he needs from Europe. But definitely, we're also going to hear that the old way of doing things is dead, is gone, and for at least the next 3 years is not coming back.
And so the Lithuanian president has also actually been speaking at Davos. And I just wanted to get your opinion a little bit on NATO as an organization and as an alliance, because a lot of people are worried about the future of NATO. Do you think the future of NATO is at stake right now with Donald Trump's claims that he wants to gain full control of Greenland? Because we know Greenland is under NATO, it's part of Denmark. We are all traditional allies with the US. Is there real concern that we could see this big strategic partnership crack up?
Well, the opposite is what I see. NATO abandoned Greenland a long time ago to its fate. NATO has been underfunded by European countries for decades. The US has been having to carry the weight of NATO on its shoulders, while European countries figured they could play welfare state with funds that they would otherwise have had to dedicate to their own defense. Trump is waking it up. NATO is the most important alliance that we have, and it needs to be up to par. European countries have to do their share. Can you imagine what would happen if the US withdrew its troops from Europe? I guarantee you a long-lasting recession. The contributions of the United States to the defense of Europe and to the economies where we keep our bases for the defense of Europe is huge. And Europe has been perfectly content to having somebody else pay for it. And this president in particular will have none of it.
Saul Montes-Bradley, very good points there. Someone speaking to me on the show yesterday said, I think Europe's finally waking up and smelling the coffee. Pretty similar to what you've just said to me. Saul Montes-Bradley is...
I didn't see it, but I agree, indeed.
Watch it next time. Saul Montes-Bradley, as always, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure.